this image here, I was just practicing new technique in Photoshop, how to create sort of storms and explosions out of white fluffy clouds, and I happened to be doing this during lockdown, and produced this sort of apocalyptic scene on the day that Dominic Cummings went up to Barnard Castle to test his eyesight. So I thought it was quite apt to put the Houses of Parliament underneath that, political storm brewing. I thought it would blow over in a few days when they sacked him, but it took a little bit longer than that. So that's my sort of political take on it. But let's talk a bit about me. So I've been taking pictures. I had my first camera when I was 10, I think. So I've been doing it for a long time. But the more important bit is I've been using Photoshop since version 4, which I understand was the first version that had layers in it and the first version that had its own proprietary format. So I've always messed with creative techniques. At that time, I used to use shoot on Fujichrome slides, and then I had a slide scanner and I'd bring them into Photoshop and mess with them then. So I've been doing sort of creative post-production for quite some time. As I mentioned, I'm Photospeed speaker, and you'll see behind my head here, that side, there's a discount code, but it'll pop up again sort of at the break as well if anyone uses Photospeed papers and inks. Thoroughly recommended. I've been using them for about 10 years, but I've only been a speaker for the last 18 months for them. And I, as I mentioned there, model photography or creative people photography, I started about 6 years ago. So you'll see some examples of that. For many years, I said I didn't have a style, and that I sort of shot a whole range of different subjects and different genres. But I'll let you be the judge as to whether you think I have got a style or not, and whether it translates from the portraits through to the other photography. I think it does, actually. So you can form your own opinion about that. So I'm going to start by talking about my approach towards photography, and I look at things on 3 steps. So I try to simplify images when I'm creating them, either in camera or in post-processing. Once I've sort of simplified it, rationalized the image to what it is that I want you to see, so I've eliminated the distractions, I'll then sort of make the most of what I've got, and if all else fails, I'll add something, it says there. For me, photography is sort of a process of discovering images. You may or may not capture something straight in camera. Great if you can, but for me, there's often a sort of deeper sort of image in there, and it's about discovering what it was that inspired you to press the shutter. Normally there should be a reason for pressing the shutter, and it's about finding the image that you were looking for. So I'll illustrate that as we go through. There'll be a fair few examples. So here's an example of sort of simplification or simplifying an image. I volunteer with the local Photographers with Disabilities group, assisting them, and I organise their photo shoots in studio for model photography, assisting those people with a variety of physical and non-physical disabilities. And on this particular occasion, Tyler came along to the studio and sat for us. And I don't normally take many pictures on those sessions. It's not about me, but I like to take a couple of snaps just so that the subject has got a few images from the sessions if the other attendees don't provide images. And on this occasion, I was just demonstrating a Rembrandt lighting setup. So I took a picture just to show them on the back of the camera how you set the lights for that. So here we've got the Rembrandt lighting. So I had no sort of aspirations of producing a great work of art or anything particularly from that. It was really just as a demo. But as I say, afterwards, I took the pictures home and I had a look, and here she's bullseye because I haven't worried about creating an image, but I took it back home and I thought, well, that's half decent. I'll give her a copy of that. So I've obviously cropped the top off because it's unnecessary and got a better composition. But then I looked at it a bit more, and I do analyze my images and look at them quite carefully to see what it is I can make from them. I was attracted to the texture on the leather jacket, and that obviously lends itself to sort of monochrome. So I've turned it into a monochrome copy and brought out the textures. And I thought this was a perfectly acceptable image to give her as a record of her sort of sitting for us for the day. But I like to explore things in a bit more detail. So I messed around in Lightroom, and I've obviously here rotated it because we're told, you know, you shouldn't have eyes dead on the horizontal. Well, they are there. So I've put her on a tilt. Okay, the earrings show that the picture's been rotated. That doesn't worry me. I take pictures for me primarily, so I don't care what judges say. So I've tipped it a little bit. I've allowed it to go dark on this side because I didn't find that added anything to the image. So let that go dark and make more of the shadows and the shape of the face, and brought out the texture of it. And I quite like that, and I thought that worked. But I looked at other alternatives. So I took it into Photoshop to extend the canvas. And you'll see as we go a bit beyond why I did that, because I've got a lot of images that use a lot of negative space creatively in them. And I've added the negative space on the left-hand side. I have been asked before, why did I add it on the left-hand side rather than the right-hand side? Well, a simple reason. If I put it on this side, that would just bleed off into nothing, and the dark shadows would just merge into the space. And there's times when that would work effectively for you, but there are, you know, for this particular image, it would have been a distraction. It wouldn't have worked. So I've added the space in here. But the other reason I added the space here was when I gave her a lift into town afterwards, after the photo shoot, she was talking a little bit about why she started modeling and what the inspiration was and her experience. And she said modeling and sitting for photographers made her feel alive. And as soon as she said that, I thought, that's the spark that generated the idea, because I knew I had this piece of graffiti from a previous photo shoot with the word alive on it. So it's just a case of popping that in behind. That now produces an image that means something to me, and it probably means something to her as well. And that's an added bonus. That's the image that I finally presented and have used in a couple of competitions, and it's done quite well for me. So you can see here the journey from a snap to a picture that's been accepted in a salon through that process of exploration, first simplifying and then adding something. Here's another couple of examples. So this young lady, I used to visit quite regularly. She lives in Newport, so unfortunately with COVID and whatever, I haven't been able to get over to see her. But on this particular occasion, she'd got a new wig. That's not her hair. And she wanted a picture of her wearing this wig. And she thought this sort of top would complement it because it's got the same sort of color tones within it. Photographically speaking, I hated that top. It really did nothing for me. And I thought it was more a clash than a compliment to it. But it didn't worry me. She wanted that picture. So I took it for her. This was what I saw, which was a much simpler image. For me, it was all about the interaction, her looking down here at the snake. It's the engagement between her and her pet snake and the fantastic shape that it formed. You have to take your time, you know, and pick your moment to get those sorts of things, but it is a bit of patience. But I thought it was all about that engagement. So what I've done is I've just put a new layer on the top and painted it in black, and I've used a mask to make sure the edges are clean. But I've eliminated all of the distracting elements that don't really add anything to the picture. So you're presented with a simplified image, and hopefully you got the message that this was about that interaction, because there's nothing else within the picture. Here's another example of simplifying something. So this was my very first studio shoot when I was at the previous camera club, and I've never worked in a studio. I'd never taken a portrait. I'd never used flash. And I was standing there sort of impatiently waiting for my turn to have a go, not really having a clue what I was doing. but I noticed the light from one of the soft boxes was casting, you know, just the modeling light was casting this light on the side of the face and just down the side of the hair. And I liked the way that light was hitting her. So I ramped up the ISO. I kept my fingers crossed that I could hold it still enough. And I took the picture, and here you can see the actual image that I took. It's nothing to do with the red dress. It's nothing to do with the light falling on the chest and on the clavicle and that sort of area. It's all about that light. So what do you do? I mean, it was a high ISO, it was a slow shutter speed, the picture isn't sharp. So what do you do with something that you like but isn't sharp? Well, you blur it, and then you blur it a bit more, and then you blur it a bit more, and you paint out the distracting areas or reduce the opacity in those areas that you don't want people to focus on, and retain the bits that you are interested in. So that's what you've got here on the right hand side. And I thought that worked quite well, considering it was my first sort of portrait photo shoot. Fortunately for me, the selectors of the London Salon agreed, and it decent pictures out of bad images, despite what people say. So there's a couple of examples of simplifying. Making the most of what you've got. So this is the sort of taking it on one stage. So here's Ellie again with one of her other snakes. She's got a whole range of snakes and reptiles and spiders and things. But on this occasion, I took Paul from Bristol over with me to visit. And because we were going to be shooting the two of them together, you don't have to be Einstein. You know, you're talking snakes, bloke, girl. What's the first thing that comes to mind? Adam and Eve. So, you know, we knew we were going to shoot something along that line. So I took an apple with me, and I made sure it was a nice red one. So I went shopping specifically to get a red apple to make sure I'd got a nice one. So here we are with, I've arranged the two of them together. I've wrapped the snake round, and then I've stepped back to take some photos, and we took a whole load because these things move. But this is the shot that I finally went for, and you can see here that I've obviously simplified it because I've taken away the back of the snake when it goes around the neck and over the shoulder at the back. I've got rid of that. I've got rid of Ellie's other hand on Paul's shoulder because that doesn't add anything to the image. It's just a distraction. So I've cleaned up the line there. I've removed the radiator. These were taken in her kitchen. You don't need a studio if you know to produce decent images. You just need to know how to work with the environment that you're with. So I've cleaned up the image, and I don't like orange, particularly spray tan orange sort of thing. Not that she was wearing any, but what I do a lot of times is I desaturate the oranges, and I might increase the luminosity of those, the brightness of the oranges as well. And here you can see I've desaturated the colors a little bit, but retained using a mask to keep the full color of the apple to actually make that more of a focus. So that's Temptation. Again, another successful image for me. I also do some retouching. It's a thing that I spend a lot of time doing to get it right. This young lady turned up with fabulous makeup. She'd done it all herself. It was absolutely flawless. But obviously the way I've got her laying, she hasn't applied makeup to the neck. You know, most girls don't do that. And it was a bit of a distraction. So I've obviously had to retouch that. But in that process, because I don't like the orange, I've taken the oranges out of the image a bit, and I decided to lighten it and go for a more high key approach. And I've just added a touch of magenta to make it more pink rather than peach. And that, I think, is a much better image there. So that's Pretty in Pink. So I do spend a lot of time retouching. But sometimes I'll add stuff. So this young lady, Shish, I've photographed her on a couple of occasions. Here I've taken a picture of her in front of the shutters, not while we were waiting to go into a studio, but it wasn't because I liked the shutters or anything like that. It was a case of I knew I had lots of stock shots that I'd photographed previously that I could put her behind, put behind her. And here, these two pieces of graffiti, or street art, they were taken in London. I used to spend a lot of time commuting up and down to London, and always carried a camera. I know several of you spoke about going out and missing pictures. I always had a camera with me, even if it was just a compact. So I photographed these. That was on a door, and this was on one of these BT junction boxes next to it. So they were in close proximity, but I photographed them separately and put the two together. But what I liked about these two is the fact that here you can present them and they're sort of sneering and staring almost judgmentally. So I call that "don't judge me," but you can put into it any story you want. It invites you to think, well, why are they sort of looking so sort of condescending or judgmentally at Shish? Is it a race thing? Is it a culture thing? Is it an age? And you can put your own story on it and invite you to sort of come up with your own idea. But I've just, as I say, called it don't judge me. And you can see I've changed the color of the top here to make it harmonize better with the background, and that's quite important for me. Here's another picture taken in the studio. This guy said he was coming along. He'd got sort of medieval armor and stuff like that, and I thought that could be quite interesting. It turned out he'd got a chainmail jacket, but he had tights and looked a bit like a silly Max Wall. If you remember, it just didn't work for me. But fortunately, the day was saved because he had this sort of vagabond urchin sort of outfit that he put on in the latter part of the session. So I took a picture of him there, and it was then just a case of looking for a background that he would fit in front of. And this is old Beaupre Castle in South Wales. It's a tiny little castle way off the beaten track. Doesn't get very many visitors, but what I was looking for was an image where the light was coming in from the right-hand side, because he's lit from the right-hand side. So it was just a case of finding a background with the same light as was on him in the same direction, and then just blending the two together. And obviously I've increased the saturation of, or the grittiness, increased the clarity on the garb here, and I've desaturated the pinky red colors here to make it match the browns within that. So matching the colors to make it work together. So there's another example. I will occasionally use textures. Here's an example, but this was shot in the studio against a yellow backdrop, and we took our inspiration from the Afghan girl photo, which I'm sure you all know. It's at McCurry, but we were playing with this fabric, and if anyone's used this type of fabric, you'll know it slips and slides all over the place. She didn't have any hair grips or anything like that. I carry them now after this experience, but she didn't have any hair grips or clips or anything like that. I always carry gaffer tape. So I said to her, can I gaffer tape this to your head? And she said, why? And I said, well, that's fine. Just, let me take it and I'll show you. So she let me gaffer tape it to her head. And it kept it in position long enough for me to take the photo. And obviously I've sort of brightened the eyes and that sort of stuff to focus on the sort of stare. But I've decided to present it as a higher key picture to make it a more golden bit of fabric rather than the sort of yellow tones in there. But yeah, always carry gaffer tape, and if you're going to be working with a model, carry clips and hair grips and that sort of stuff as well. Now back to Shish. So this was another shoot in the studio. The backdrop is carnation pink, not that you would know it, it's just a case of not having much light falling onto it. And I had said to the makeup artist, a friend of mine that we were going to be working with on that occasion, I'd said to both of them, let's pick yellow, and that was the only brief I gave them. And the reason I picked yellow was I'd seen a photo of Shish wearing a yellow outfit on 60-foot high billboard at London Designer Outlet, where she did an advert, and it was on this sort of the side of the shopping centre, and she posted a copy on her social media. So I'd seen that yellow was a colour that worked well with her skin tones and things. So we picked yellow, and because we picked yellow, I took the flowers along, the sunflowers. They're a bit manky. They were £2 from Aldi, so no expense spared, but I took them along and got her to sort of adopt this pose. The makeup artist designed the face sort of makeup and stuff, but taking inspiration from the flowers, took some of the petals and stuck them onto the face as well and added some tears. But when I looked at this picture and got it home, I love this pink, this deep sort of purple color, but I looked at it and I thought, well, what is it that is particularly interesting to me? And it was these flowers look a little bit dead, a bit withered, they're past their best. So I looked at desaturating it a little bit, and then they become almost like dried, dying sort of flowers. And that's where I started pursuing this idea of, you know, the wilting flowers at the end of the summer and the tears because summer's passing sort of thing. So I went with this sort of color here, taking a swatch from the back and using that to colorize the background to harmonize it. I've desaturated it a little bit to avoid the glaring sort of yellow. The reason I've cut it off the top here is the afro was difficult to deal with and it added nothing to the picture. So I've chopped the top off. You don't need to see the top of her head to know she's got one. So I produced this image here and that's Summer's Gone, and it's my feeling about the end of the season, and the flowers are wilting to symbolize that. So this is what I was saying about trying to discover the picture that sits within that image. I'm sure there are lots of other images that people could have produced, but that's how I chose to present it, and that did well for me. It got into the Masters of Print last year, so I was quite pleased with that. Sometimes I go a bit overboard with adding things. So here's a couple of extreme ones. So this was another photo shoot at Margam Castle outside Port Talbot. I'd been invited by another photographer to go along and take part in the shoot, which she'd organised, mainly because she wanted me to share the costs. But she'd organised the model, so I didn't really know what to expect on the day. And I turned up and the model Asda here was wearing this wig with a frigate and feathers and a skull on the front. And I thought, you know, this is a little bit bonkers. It's a bit out there. And you can see it's wood panelled walls and all this sort of stuff. And we did do some other shots as well. And there's a fabulous staircase there, if you know Margam Court, brilliant staircase. But I thought, having taken this picture, I've got to take her out of that situation, stick her in the sea. That's where a figurehead or a frigate or boat actually belongs. So I've sort of stuck her here. There's obviously a rock behind, which is why the waves are sort of breaking and crashing over. And I've used the masks to sort of bring her through in place of the rocks. There's 3 different images here of waves that I've composited together. The island is another picture, and there's 2 different skies that I've merged together, and the birds come from another image. So there's about 8 different images all together in there, and that was about 3 or 4 hours work to put that together. Once I'd cut it out, the cutting out took a bit of time. When I say cutting out, I don't actually mean cutting out. I mean using a layer mask to mask out the other bits to leave you with the image, so that it's just a sort of non-destructive process that you can tweak and go back to if you want to. So that's one of the more extreme ones, and it prints really nicely. Here's another one. When I started doing model photography, I joined a couple of local groups, and we'd meet sort of once a month and sort of shoot on location, or occasionally we'd go into a studio. This was for a studio shoot, and the theme was going to be winter wonderland or winter fantasy. So she put together this outfit, or her friend put together the outfit for her. And you know, while I was waiting to go into the studio, I was looking around and I spotted this sort of large Christmas bauble, and it got a crack where it had obviously been dropped, and it just been discarded and chucked in the corner. And that's when I took the inspiration from it. So I've asked her to sort of adopt this pose and hold the bauble with the top of it facing away from the camera so you can't see it, but also to show the crack back towards me. And the reason I went off on this sort of tangent was at the time drawing inspiration from Game of Thrones, which was just big, being launched and was hitting the all the media with a lot of hype and stuff. And I thought, well, this could be an egg that's sort of hatching. And the reason I thought this could be an egg that's hatching with a dragon coming out of it was because I knew I had this picture in my library with this dragon from the Harry Potter experience, where it's bursting out of the roof of Hogwarts. So knowing I'd got that picture, I bagged this and then I went off and put this together, changed the color tones with some rust and stuff. There is another reptile eye there that you've probably missed, but I've composited it all together and printed it up, and I gave her a copy of it for Christmas. So who wouldn't want a dragon for Christmas? So that's Dragon Queen. Here's another picture that's done quite well for me. This was a local photographic studio, and again they used to run sessions sort of monthly or bi-monthly on a Friday evening, open it up to a dozen photographers, get a makeup artist and a couple of models in, and you'd pay a few quid and go and have some pizza and some drink and take a few photos. And on this occasion, they were going to paint the models white with the red lips, taking the inspiration from the Robert Plant music video sort of thing, Addicted to Love. But when I saw the two of them, I got this idea of, Fern resting her head on Cornelia's hand and Cornelia giving her a bit of a telling off. And I thought it'd be quite a nice idea to cut her out. And when I've presented this image before, people have said, well, how did you get the head to look like it was really there? Well, here's a spoiler. The head was really there. It's a lot easier to actually take it in situ. I mess with Photoshop, but it's a lot easier to do it in camera to make it look realistic, because it was actually real. What I should have done was I should have made sure Fern's hair all came in front of her shoulder, so it came down here properly, because you can see there's a bit of a mess there where it where the hair was behind the shoulder and I haven't fixed it properly. But I've done that in the proper print. And then the foreground detail. My wife was going into a bookstore to browse to buy, look for a book or whatever. So, she's a reader. I'm a photographer. I sat down in the there was a leather sofa just on the inside of the shop. I sat down there and photographed the chair because it was there. And it's about collecting textures and things like that for composites. So I did that. And obviously the figures come from Crosby Beach, the Gormley exhibit on the beach north of Liverpool. And there's a couple of skies together, but that's my image Face Off. So that one's done well for me. This one's probably one of the longest to produce, not the hardest, but it was certainly one of the longest. And the main reason being, I had seen an image previously where they'd created a scene using a sky sort of city skyline with a sunset beyond it, and ostensibly you produce it by rotating it 90 degrees, so you've got the city here and the sky in the middle, and then have another copy on another layer and rotate it the opposite way so that the two skies merge in the middle to give you this shaft of light, and then you produce something else in it. And I thought this had a cinematic sort of feel, and it's something I'd wanted to do for a long time, to try to see if I could take this style and the technique and apply it to some of my images. So the reason it took so long was I didn't have this in my library of images, so I had to wait until I had an opportunity to go out and find a skyline with a suitable vantage point. So this was taken in London on a Photo 24 photo marathon, where you're out there shooting for 24 hours a day solidly. But I took this picture over the city, and it's not sharp because you couldn't use a tripod in the hotel bar that I took it from, the Novotel. But I got the shot that I needed to put this together. So then it was a case of putting those two together, taking another portrait of Shish. This is natural light, big picture window, but I've put a black board behind her, so the light's coming around both sides of the black board to give that fantastic rim light. So I've taken that picture, so that's the color copy here. I've produced a monochrome copy, increased the contrast so the shadows block up a bit, and then I've just transformed that and stretched it down so the eyes go that way and chin comes down here, so it made it bigger. And what I've used is the dark bit of the monochrome copy is now filled with the light from this sunset down the middle, which has sort of filled that area. And because it's lit on that side, it also hides the white side of the face, the narrow lit side of the face, to produce that image. And it's quite easy to do. The important thing here is making sure that the back of the head remains in register, so you keep those together there, and that these remain on a line going there. So this eye has moved to there on the monochrome copy. And I produced that, printed it off and gave her a copy, and you know, she was absolutely chuffed to have her own sort of film poster. I haven't thought of a title. Perhaps I ought to have given it a title, you know, and put that on there. But I call it City Lights, and again, it's another successful image for me. So that's some of my sort of creative work and taking you through my approach. So this next section is really a bit more of my portrait work, applying some of those ideas towards a Welsh panel that I put in for the associateship there. The reason I went for the Welsh panel is quite straightforward, because I'm in the Western Counties, so I can't be a member of the Welsh Federation. They can't charge me a membership. So you pay once for your submission to them, and then you get the letters and you can keep them for life. Unlike something like the RPS, you have to pay an annual subscription if you want to keep using your letters. With this, you get the letters and they're yours to keep forever. So anyway, this was the image that I wanted to start with. This was the inspiration for putting together my panel. I wanted to produce some black and white pictures, quite stark graphic, using this as a key element of it. So where did I start? First thing I did was I went off and looked to see what other images I'd got. Now these are pictures that I had already processed independently from separate photo shoots. And you can see some of them I've got quite a lot of negative space around them where I've painted out details that were not sort of particularly interesting. You've seen that one already, but this is another one from the same shoot. You've seen that one just a moment ago. So there's a number of images there that I've already got. Now this is what they were like before I even started. So these are the raw images. So you can see how I changed them. This one, for example, I've already chopped the left-hand side off and decided it was going to be monochrome, because this is the side of her face that's interesting. It's those shapes, it's not this bit over here. So you can see those were the originals that I'd used, but that's the processed images that I'd got. So the next step was to decide, okay, I need to make this a monochrome panel, so let's turn them all monochrome. And you'll notice here that I've filled this picture here, that dark space, I've just painted it out so that it fits with all of these others. And what I've decided here was to use black, solid black, as a compositional device to enable me to present these together. So having got those, you then play pairs and work out which images fit left and right and that sort of stuff. So, you know, here she's looking to the right, so that could go on the left side, this could go on the right hand side. These obviously are central pictures because the figure's straight on, looking up or looking straight at you, and the same goes here. These two lend themselves to being left and right. These lend themselves left and right. So again, I've got a variety of ones. These two could go opposing each other, but obviously one of them would need to be flipped. So I've played the pairs game. So then you look at how would they be arranged within the panel. So the top row, there were only 3 shots, 2 with Ellie and 1 with this guy, Paul, with the same snake. So that sort of gave itself to me straight away. I then played with the other 2 lines, and it's a panel of 12. So this was the first attempt. So you can see here I've flipped the picture of Dakari that I've painted out the background. I've flipped it so it now echoes this one, and this one I've flipped as well to echo that. So that was a set that I produced, and this one here was definitely a weak link, because he's looking up and there's nothing solid for him to be looking at. It didn't really work for me as an image. So I substituted that one, and then I decided to take that one out and put Liana in instead, because I thought the shape of this one echoed the shape of that. But what I've done is I've used the abundance of dark space as a compositional device to allow me to present all of these images on these 2 rows, identical shape and size, and then to position the figures within those so that they echoed each other left to right. And that enabled me to produce something that worked together with a better balance and more consistency than would have otherwise been the case. And then it left me with the remaining thing was to come up with an image that echoed this to fill in that gap. I always knew I'd have to produce 1 image at least for the panel, but this purpose of looking back through my other images was to see if I needed to take any additional pictures, or which pictures did I need to take, so that I could go out and shoot with a purpose. But it worked out that there was only the 1 gap required to be filled. So that's the picture that I took to fill the gap. And the hard part for me was, I knew I'd have to take him on the right hand side of the image and shoot across. So he's lit from the left hand side. The hard part was finding a pose that was as strong as this pose and echoed it but wasn't the same. So that was the image that I took and it's the only image I took for this whole panel deliberately. The rest were using existing material. This went up for assessment, and I was there at the time, although obviously not allowed to participate or whatever, but I knew one of the guys who was putting the pictures up and taking them down again, and he said to me afterwards that they did take quite a long time in assessing this panel. It was about 10 minutes plus on the day, and there was some heated argument, and it transpired that first comment was they'd never seen so much black on a panel, which is fine. So they weren't quite sure how to deal with that. And the second was some of them, or there was debate whether this picture should be on the left-hand side and that one should be on the right-hand side. And the answer, quite simply, is no, it shouldn't, because if that had been over there, the black would have bled into nothing. It would have just bled out of the panel. There wouldn't have been anything sort of constraining the panel and holding it together. The reason you have bookends is to act as bookends to hold it all together. So they finally came around to the realization that the way I presented it was the way it should be presented, and that was the right answer. And yeah, it's just a shame you can't see the prints. It looks a lot better in print than it does on screen. So that's the end of that little section. The next section is really talking about some of the images that I've taken during the lockdown. Does anyone have any questions you want to ask now, or shall I just crack on with the next section?
I've got one, if I may.
Yeah, go for it.
It's lovely to see some of your work. My question is, and the answer is probably just experience, when do you know when to stop in Photoshop?
When it's finished. And you have to go, I'll show you other examples, but you usually know when it's finished. And sometimes you have to go a bit beyond it. I liken it to running up a cul-de-sac, smacking your face into the brick wall at the end and then realizing you need to back off a bit and take a different turn. There's more than a few of those occasions. But it's usually quite obvious when you get to the finished point. You might want to just tweak a little bit here and there, but it's usually self-evident, in my experience.
Thank you.
Any more? Okay, I'll crack on then.
Yeah.
So lockdown, it happened, and it sort of disrupted everything. But here's a few things that I got up to during that period. So the initial lockdown, not the current one. So I'm sure many of you saw these sorts of things. I regard myself as a creative image maker, and it happens that photography is my chosen medium, rather than painting or drawing. But when I looked at these, and they were everywhere on social media and on blogs and this, that and the other at the beginning of the lockdown, people were producing these using the 12 filters in Photoshop to produce these sort of abstract patterns. So I thought I ought to get in on it and have a go. So I had a play and produced some pictures. Here's a couple of examples. And it's a fun thing to do, and you produce images that I think are visually pleasing and work as an arrangement. Some are more successful than others, and it is a bit random. But for me, this crosses the line and is no longer photography. Even though it started with a photo, it's no longer photography, because there isn't any element of the original photo remaining within these compositions. They've actually strayed too far. So these are what I would call abstract art. You know, it's not photography anymore. So, but I like to sort of put things together, and you've seen how I've put people with backgrounds. So I thought I'd have a go at putting some subjects into some of these pictures and see if you could come up with a concept that worked. Clearly this one doesn't. It's a bit of a mess, really, but it was the best I could produce. And this is one of the cul-de-sacs I ran up to and decided that I hadn't finished it, but it didn't, I'd taken it as far as it would go, and that was the end of that cul-de-sac. So it's here anyway, just as an illustration. It doesn't really work. This one, on the other hand, works for me. And I say for me, it may not work for any of you. The reason it works for me is because for many years I've wanted to take pictures in a studio using a projector to illuminate the subject, the person, as though they are the screen, rather than, you know, so you're projecting onto their body or onto them. And when I inverted the colors and produced this, that's what it reminded me of. So I'll take you right back to the beginning where I said about searching for something that has meaning for you in that when you took it. Here I've produced an image that reminds me of something that I wanted to do, and I've still not done it. So it's on the to-do list. But it created an illusion of that concept, that idea that I wanted. And as such, I really like that picture. I don't know whether she does or not. I've shared it with her, but she hasn't posted it on social media, so she may not. That doesn't really worry me. Here we had this young lady came along to the studio, and I took some pictures. So I've tried to sort of echo the shapes around her. That for me doesn't really work. So it's another cul-de-sac that I worked on. This one I thought I'd got to a finished point. I don't know whether you like it or not. I did sufficiently enough to print it and put it into one of our internal competitions at my club. And the idea here was to use the curves to sort of echo the curves of the hips, so accentuate those, and to produce a sort of halo around the top, which would frame the you know, the top of the torso. The judge quite rightly crucified me when it came to the judging of the picture. And, you know, this is why I do encourage, I mean, I know you don't do a lot of competitions, but I always encourage people to post images and ask for feedback and on the images, because they might have saved me a bit of embarrassment. Well, it wasn't embarrassing, it was just, but as I say, I got crucified. The reason I got crucified is if you look at this arm, she's got tattoos all the way down her arm which make it dark against a dark background. I've then got her arranged with her hand across, so she's breaking the arm line here. I've then added all of this sort of stuff on, which has further broken up the line of the arm, and suddenly this hand appears from nowhere, as the judge said, and said, well, this isn't connected to anything because I've split it by all of this going on in the middle. The judge was absolutely correct. As soon as they said it, I thought, oh dear, I've been rumbled. This really doesn't work. I had completely overlooked that. Had I asked someone for some feedback beforehand, they might have saved me that. But yeah, so this is a picture that doesn't really work. I thought it did at the time. It doesn't, and it's been retired. I'm not using it anymore. I also managed to get out a bit. I'm fortunate enough that 5 minutes from the house, I can be up onto the hills and then down to the River Avon near me. So this was on an evening walk, just approaching sunset. I'd taken a camera with me, as I said, always carry a camera. And I was walking along the river and I suddenly heard this almighty splash. And I turned around and 3 deer had jumped off the opposite bank. And it was about an 8 to 10 foot drop down into the river. And they just launched straight off the bank into the river. I didn't think they'd do that. I thought they'd find somewhere where they could get down to it low enough. But then they swam across and pulled themselves out. I'm not sure whether you can see it. You probably can't, but there's water dripping off and flying off the rump of this one into the distance there. I quite like these. I do enter a lot of competitions. I enter international salons and stuff like that. Until recently, I said, I'd not got any acceptances. I've now got one. These were deemed not good enough quality, but they're still some of the best wildlife shots that I've got. I don't have very many. I try, and as such, I've presented them. But this one just stopped for a few seconds, looked at me, and then scarpered into the woods. I also got up at the other end of the day, so same location, the river there with the mist over it, some of the locals, and you can see it's a bit chilly. The wife did get up and come with me on a couple of occasions, but it was just that being out with my camera, taking pictures of the sun coming up. Nothing too taxing really, just as a record of my daily walks. No great vistas of bluebells or anything near us. There's a little wood which had a poxy sort of bunch of about a dozen plants, right. And I knew they were there, so I'd take them in on my trip. I just went along with the camera. I use Olympus, so it's a crop sensor, so it's 2-time crop. These were taken with 40 to 150 mil at the 150 end, so that's 300 mil equivalent, handheld. I didn't take a tripod or anything, and shot narrow depth of field, so wide open, and the sunrise is just coming up in the background, and I was just throwing the background into the sort of bokeh and trying to hold it still enough to keep these sharp in the foreground. They're not pin sharp, but I've not seen bluebells portrayed in this style before, and I was just trying to see if I could capture something different using those small number of plants rather than the carpets that you normally see. So again, these are pictures for me as a record of what I did. Also photographed wildlife in the garden, so we had plenty of these on the bushes in the garden and the trees. We only had about 3 or 4 butterflies in the garden in the summer. Very sort of poor show, really. And I only found 1 caterpillar in the garden. This is it. So I catalogued it, and we had some weeds in the lawn. It was an excuse to try out some macro photography and practice a little bit. But on a rainy day, I'd go back to Photoshop. So here, this is a stalk for a bunch of grapes after you'd eaten the grapes. I actually photographed it. So this was in my library of images. And you may ask yourself, why would you photograph a grape, a bunch of grapes, the stalk? Well, the reason I did it was it reminded me of these lone trees that you see in lakes, like the Wanaka tree in the South Island, New Zealand, or the Clamberis tree up there or something. I thought it'd come in handy at some point if I want to produce a composite. So that was why I'd photographed it. But because I'd been doing those sort of twirl images, I thought, well, this lacks color. It's brown and brown and brown. What happens if you twirl that? Well, this is what happens. You produce something that's a mush and a bit of a mess. So that doesn't work at all. So again, exploring, seeing what I could produce out of it, I decided to apply a flood filter on the bottom half, and I quite liked the shapes and the patterns that it produced. Hated the background there, and that doesn't work, so I blurred it. And I thought, well, this sort of gives me a background into which I can composite a foreground image or something. But I normally work the other way around. I start with the foreground and then find a background that complements it. So I thought it would be a good challenge to actually try to do it the other way around. So having got this watery scene, you obviously need to put a boat in it. So I went and found a boat. So this is the picture I picked. Didn't like the white cabin, so I got rid of that, and I duplicated the front, warped it to produce the back side of it, and then cut out all the rigging, or masked out all the rigging. So I got my boat. Then I thought, well, you need to have somebody in the boat. So I went and found this picture of Annabelle taken at Kilve Beach. And the reason I picked this one is you'll see her front foot is higher than her back foot. And that meant that I could put her on the prow of the boat as if she's standing with one foot up on the boat and the other foot lower down inside the boat. So it's little bits of detail that make it believable. It meant I didn't have to warp it, twist it, or whatever, because she's already in a stance that could fit together in the boat. So I stuck them in, and then I thought, well, I need to put something in the background. So I went and found some mountains across Lake Geneva, stuck those in the background, and then I had a bit of a hole, so I filled it in with an island from Lake Maggiore in Italy, and produced this image. So I've produced this warm tone copy, and I thought, well, I quite like that. But you know, we know mountains are usually a little cooler, bluer light and that sort of stuff. What happens if I keep some of the blueness and mask it so that the blueness shows through from the background? So I produced this one as well, and I put both of those up onto Facebook and invited people to say which one they produced and what preferred and why. And it turned out there was about a 50-50 vote. But the reason I encourage people to get feedback is you might occasionally get somebody come up with something you haven't even considered. And one person sparked up and said, well, actually, I'd like to see it with the warmth in the background and the blue tones in the water, because I like the tone here on the foreground. So I went away and had a look, and this was the result of, because of that suggestion, I went away and produced this. And this is the final picture that I actually produced and printed. And it's a much better image in my mind than either of these other two. So as I say, it's worth getting feedback on your pictures to see what people think. Here's another example. So you can see the picture down the bottom here. That's the original shot. You can see the light there with me white holding the stand. This was taken on a dance workshop with Kate Byrne. She's a classically trained ballerina, and she was on this dance workshop. And I got her to adopt this pose and flap this little bit of fabric that was hanging from her waist out. Not because I liked that bit of fabric, but because I already had this image where I'd got this billowing fabric. I knew, you know, I could substitute and put this fabric onto this picture as long as I had the pose. And I wasn't particularly worried about the background. So you can see I've got rid of all of the background. So then, having produced Kate with the foreground, and I've had to double the size of the image over here. So I've extended the canvas, increased the rocks, copying that across, cut her out and add all the fabric. It was then a case of finding a complementary background to stick her in. So I went off looking for different shots. So these are in Iceland mostly. The important thing here was, because obviously it's the way it's billowing, the wind is coming from the left to the right. So I had to flip the background here so that the steam is blowing from left to right. And same for that one. Here I stuck her in front of the Jakkalsen ice lagoon on a misty day, taking her back to the north part of the island where it's more sort of dusty and volcanic. Here we were in the middle of the North Sea. I went on a cruise, and this was somewhere towards sunset, totally sort of in the middle of the North Sea somewhere. This one here is on a as we exited one of the fjords about midnight, and you can see the last vestige of light here creeping in. And you can see I've changed the tone of the images to suit the background and complement it. So browner tones here, sort of darker muted ones here, bluer ones here. These were the, so I put all 6 up onto social media and asked people to say which ones they preferred, and these were the 2 that they preferred, which actually were the 2 that I preferred. So, that were no surprises there. In the end, I went with this one at the bottom. And the reason I went for it was you've got a little bit of pink in the sky still, and that gives some validity to the light on the front of her face and the warm tones down the front of the shin and the thigh and that sort of stuff. Had the warmth been over this side, it wouldn't have made sense. Had there not been any sort of colour and it had been uniformly blue toned, then again, that wouldn't have worked. So I've worked with that light to try to produce something that is plausible. So that's Spirit of the Wind. And again, it's a picture that's done well for me. Also had a go at this sort of stuff. I'm sure many of you have had a go at dandelion seed heads. I'd not had a go previously. What I did learn was it's a much easier thing to do if you have one of these atomizer sprays that people with contact lenses and things have. If you're trying to use a garden sprayer, it tends to produce drops that are too heavy, and this is what happens if you get a big drop on it. It just drips and so on. If anyone's wondering how I got it to stand upright, it's blue tack under the surface of the water. So these are a couple of pictures that I took, and here's a couple more, with different arrangements. So that was an afternoon well spent. I quite like this one, and you can see there's several dandelion seed heads still on the head. So you've probably guessed I tried putting people into them. So I've taken Kate from another sort of shot on the same dance workshop and got her sort of plucking drops of water off the top there. I'm not sure whether this one works. I got to the point where I had finished with it, but didn't seem to sort of quite work as effectively as I'd want. So I then produced this one. No people in it, but that doesn't mean it doesn't work. Obviously flooded the foreground here. I've put a sky in the background, taken that as a color swatch to colorize the bottom, added the birds in, and then finished it off by putting the heron there. I did try a hippopotamus because I was thinking, well, what animal can you get in water that's sort of pink color to go with this color tone? And I put a hippo in there and it just didn't work at all. So I took that out and went back for the heron. So that's that. Also had to go at some drip photography. This is using the old school plastic bag with a pinhole in it, and then hoping that I fire the flash at the right time to catch the drops. So I took several thousand images over 3 hours, I think it was, one evening. It's backlit, and I got half a dozen decent pictures out of it, but it was a good way of taking up a bit of time. And then I did some star trails in the back garden. I got a couple of meteors. This is about 20-minute star trail. I did catch the comet Neowise, not in any stunning location, unfortunately, because the forecast was that it was going to be cloudy. I stuck my head out the door about 11 o'clock, 11:30 at night, and I saw it was just clearing. So I grabbed my gear and legged it to the nearest open bit of grass just a couple of roads away. So that's a wide shot, and that's a long shot there of the comet. So that's that. And then for this section, normally wrap up with here's a picture I took in Copenhagen, and it's a fantastic building. It's the Axel Axel Towers, it's called, apartment block. We were on holiday for Christmas, and I thought I love sort of this type of architecture and tried to make something from it. I also like sort of glass fronted steel and concrete constructions, modern architecture and that sort of stuff. So I thought I'd try to produce something that complements those two together. The inspiration was this picture here by Marcel van Balken, The Runner, where you've got a figure running around on I'm assuming he's been photoshopped in onto this sort of teardrop on this big building. And I wanted to see if I could produce something with the same sort of look and feel and take that idea to do it myself. So this is an image that I put into a salon, and it was accepted. And it took me about 10 minutes to produce. So I was going to give you a quick demo in Photoshop of how to produce that in probably 5 minutes if we've got fun, and then we can have a quick break. So let's just stop that and then go share Photoshop. So this is the image we were just looking at, and here's the original. So what I did here to start with, and I do like messing with Photoshop and blend modes from time to time. So the first thing to do was duplicate that layer. So I've now got 2 layers here. And I then went Edit, Transform, Flip horizontally, and you can see we've now got a reverse copy. So we've got one on top of the other. This is where I start getting creative, and something I would urge you to have a play with some of your things if you want to try to produce something graphic. So click on you've got normal blend mode is the default. I'm using Photoshop version 6. It's the last version before the subscription things, but these techniques are still available if you've got the newer subscription ones. I normally click on the first one there, and I just use the down arrow to scroll through, and you can see the blend modes changing each time. And as I go through these, I'm looking to see, does anything move me? Does anything grab me as being particularly interesting or worth pursuing? So I'll just whiz through those. That's quite funky, but a bit too busy. It's a bit kaleidoscopic, a bit chaotic, but carry on. And then I go all the way to the bottom. And then I've got to the bottom, last one, luminosity, and then I'll sort of scroll my way back up and see if anything grabbed me. And the one that sort of appealed to me was this one. And I said at the beginning I didn't like orange and so on. Well, what's opposite to orange? So if you come over here and you use these in amongst all the adjustments, I'm sure you're mostly familiar with the whichever you normally use, but I'll use the invert one from time to time. So you put an invert layer on, and suddenly you've got all this blue, and it starts to look like, you know, a big glass fronted edifice with concrete pillars or whatever. So this was nearly what I wanted, but I was less happy with the sort of slight cyan-y blue at the top there and the more magenta blue down the bottom here. So that was a little bit distracting for me. So I wanted to bring those together. So my preferred technique for dealing with that is to use hue and saturation. So I'll put on a hue and saturation layer on. And if you click the colorize, it turns it all one color. And then you can drag the hue across, and you can sort of, where do you want to stop? You can decide where stop, probably somewhere around there. And you can mess with the saturation. Actually, I think I left it where it started. So you can see that's already 80–90% of the way there. It is a little bit light, so I've used the brightness and contrast, and I've decided, you know, to bring the brightness down a little bit or a lot. Where did I go? Somewhere. But that's a bit too dark. So let's see what happens if you bring the contrast up. And there we are, you've got something that's probably, is that a close approximation?
Probably a little darker than I remember you.
Yeah, right. I come up with something different every time, but you get the idea. And this is where, to Derek's question about how do you know when you've finished? These ones, oh, that isn't too bad. I was quite close this time. It's probably a little bit more contrasty and a bit brighter. Yeah, so ostensibly the only thing that's different between the one I've just produced and the final copy is the addition of the figures. I have used a curve just to add a little bit of solidity to these walkways, because obviously if you're going to place people walking around within the subject, they've got to have something solid enough to support their weight. So I've just used a curve there to increase the solidity there. And then we've got the figures. How do I get the figures? Well, if we disable the layer mask, you can see this is just a monochrome copy of a silhouette of a chap walking on a beach. And I've just used the layer mask to hide the beach, and the same for this figure here. Again, chap there, I've actually rotated it, but I've just used the mask again to mask the figure. I did post this on social media and asked people what they thought of it, and got the usual, you need 3 people. So I added a figure up there, didn't like it. Added a figure here, didn't like it. And on this occasion, I chose to ignore the feedback that people had given saying, oh, you've got to obey the rule of 3 and that sort of stuff. I thought, because this is a symmetrical picture and we've got solid objects echoed, then 2 works with that, but having them asymmetrically arranged splits that up. So that's the final arrangement that I produced. And that's the one that I used and entered into Salons. You can do other things with them. You can turn the picture upside down. And when I did that, I thought, oh, that looks like, you know, a reflection here carrying on beyond. So if you've got a reflection like that, well, turn it into a swimming pool, the water's reflecting it. And then if you're going to have someone there, just to emphasize it, have a figure sitting on the edge. So that's another picture from the same one, just by turning the tower upside down. And then I produced something which was even wackier. You can see I've got a lot more lines here, but effectively, this is built around these layers at the bottom, which is having the picture rotated 90 degrees one way and then 90 degrees the other way, so that these pillars come across the image. And then it's just using masks to make sure that, you know, where they would have normally crossed over, that they don't. And when I did that, I thought, well, you know, this looks like it could be a star cruiser going through the galaxy. Let's just put some stars in the background, and I've got the same figures, but I have used all 3 this time. So, you know, you can explore different ideas and you can go down different routes. But of those pictures, you know, I think they're 3 acceptable different images from the same source. But that one's obviously the better one for me. So that's the one that I've stuck with and used. So that was the end of that sort of first section. I know it's quite a long sort of chunk, and it's getting close to your finish time. So apologies for overrunning a bit, but any questions?
Derek, you were...
Yeah, I've got another one, please. Photoshops sometimes can tend to be a bit of a minefield if you know what you want to try and do, but you don't know how to do it. I tend to use YouTube a lot to help me.
Yep. So
are there any people in YouTube that you follow or you would recommend that one follows?
Yeah, I've got a list of those further on after the next section. So I can certainly send that through so you can have a look at it. There's a whole list of people that I sort of follow. And what I tend to do, as you've just alluded to, is I'll find a YouTube tutorial that has a particular technique that I like, and then I will sit with that on one screen and I'll sit with Photoshop on another, and I'll see if I can apply step by step their process to my images to produce something that is similar. As I showed you there, you know, the inspiration for this picture doesn't look anything like this picture, but it's melding that idea to images that I've got and to other things that I like, you know, glass structures and architecture and that sort of stuff, to bring it all together.
Great.
Okay, do people want to have a quick comfort break, or shall I carry on?
What's the duration of your next?
The next bit's about 15 minutes, and we can probably wrap up after that. It's just showing some of my non-people photography. I've shown quite a lot of the people stuff, but it goes into some of the other genres that I take.
Okay, yeah, I think if you carry on then for your next 15-minute session and then wrap up, that would be perfectly appropriate. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay, let's go back to let's just restart PowerPoint. Right, so share. So I normally stop with a break there. I'll put this on this discount code on the email when I send through the details of the people that I share. So if anyone wants to take advantage of that, you're welcome to have a go.
Thank you.
So nobody, this is part of a full evening talk that I do as well. So it's really just a preview. Now, I said at the beginning that I've been messing for a long time. This is probably the early 1990s when I first got Photoshop and was playing around. And at the time, magazines used to have free actions and things that you could on the covers that you could sort of install and have a play. I could do this in Photoshop now. It effectively just takes the image, shrinks it down, offsets it to one side, and then repeats. And all you did there was you pick your vanishing point and then off it went. As I say, I could do that now in an action. But this was an image that I applied it to. It's a very poor quality of a low resolution slide scan where I was just messing about, and I never felt inclined to redo it, but it's just here as an early example. So this was my Everlasting Tulips. So I have some pretty bad titles for some of my images. I try to give titles that give you a sense of what it is that I'm thinking. Or what it reminds me of, just to help the viewer in the right direction. So that was the Everlasting Tulips. This was another example of just messing in Photoshop. I don't do much landscape photography because I sort of object to the idea of having to drive for 2 or 3 hours to somewhere and then hope the light comes good. But on this occasion, I went out and I used to work in that office there. And when I wasn't commuting up to London, this is in Bristol. So I watched this whole place being built, and there's an underground car park underneath here, and about 2/3 of the cost was spent on engineering to anchor the car park below the ground, because it's below the water table. And if they hadn't spent all that money, it would have just bobbed up like a cork sort of thing. So I thought, given that knowledge, I thought it'd be a good idea or fun thing to do to flood the square. So I went out with my camera and a tripod and I took this panorama, and you can see I don't do a lot of landscapes because I got the exposure right here and I didn't check all the way around, and it's blown out at this side. And this was before Photoshop had a panorama feature in it. So this was done the old-fashioned way of taking pictures, overlapping them, and then warping them to make sure that they merge together, and then blending them. Obviously, you don't need to do any of that. Photoshop does it all for you now, much better than I did. But then, having produced the panorama, I then decided to flip a copy, and again, no fancy flood filter or anything. I just use a ripple in the foreground. To sort of give this watery approach, but because you can see the midline there, I've sort of mirrored it, but some of these elements here are come forward, so then you have to do those on separate layers. This was an exercise to see if I could do it It's not something I'd do again, but it was a good learning exercise, and as such, you know, I still show it because it's something I enjoy, and it's a picture for me, not for a judge. And it sort of means something because of the journey that it took me on in developing my skills. This is up in London. As I said, I used to spend a lot of time commuting up and down to London, and this was a courtyard outside a wine bar that I walked past every time I went up there. And here, what I've done is I've sort of duplicated the layer. I've expanded, transformed it so that one side is bright, that one layer is bigger than the other, so that different colors overlap. So that's why you've got some pinks and blues mixing to give these purples in some of the areas. And then I've increased the saturation using some of the blend modes to add those together to give this rich color. It was quite wishy-washy and bland, really, to be honest, but I wanted to create something that was vibrant and spoke to me, you know, and was busy and didn't have big gaps in it. So that's my version of umbrellas. This is an opportunity, as I say, always take a camera with you. So I always carried a compact camera if I didn't take my SLR. But on this occasion, I just had a Panasonic waterproof ruggedized camera. The reason it was a ruggedized one was I meant I could stick it in my pocket and not worry about scratching the lens or anything with my car keys or my loose change. But this is 8 o'clock in the evening, waiting to come back to Bristol at Paddington. The trains were up the Swanee for some reason. It was quite often signalling or whatever outside London. So I'm up on the gangway over the top here, waiting to see which platform my train was going to come into. And this one pulled in, and I knew it was going to be packed with people and they were going to all stream off that way to the exit. And I knew, given the time and the amount of light, that it was quite dark. It was going to be a longish exposure on the auto. It was about 10-15 seconds. So I just waited for enough people to get to the front to fill up the platform, hoping there's enough people still behind me coming forward to give this sort of snake appearance. And then I just took the shot, bracing the camera, holding it as still as I could. And sure enough, I got these blurry lines of people wandering down and coming around here and coming up onto the concourse, exactly as I wanted. What absolutely makes this is no one walked across here in front of this guy, and that he remained absolutely static for the whole time of the exposure. So yeah, you have to make your own luck. I made my luck because I decided to take all of this stuff. So I was in a position to capitalize on the fact that this guy was so obliging. Had I not set up this original shot, you know, that would have been irrelevant. So you've got to be in it to win it. The reason these look like they've got multiple people here is because as they walk, they bounce up and down, so it produces a separate sort of apparent image for each one. That's in no particular hurry, because he was in no particular hurry. He was waiting like I was for the next train. Messing about with shapes on and shadows and light on the South Bank. So this was just a picture of some shadows. If you're going to tilt the camera, I always say tilt it so it looks like it's up out on purpose. So it can't be an accident, you know, not a couple of degrees off. 45 degrees, you haven't done that by accident, you know, you meant to do it. And I quite like the flare here because it comes through here and it breaks up this solid black area that would have otherwise been a bit too dominant in the image. But that's, you know, just an exercise in shadow and silhouettes. Here, I spotted that, you know, as someone walked towards this light, if you squinted and defocused your eyes, they sort of merged into the edges of the walls, you know, of the doorway. So I focused at my feet, kept the focus, so the image was completely out of focus, and took that. And that's just a picture of light and color. As I say, I like photography, I like abstract sort of stuff. Unlike those 12 pictures, this still has an element of photography in it. You can still recognize that it's based on a photographic original. As with this, hopefully, I've never used it in a competition, although I've just printed it only yesterday. But this was taken again in London on my commute from the station to the office. And again, with the compact, I would often shoot from the hip, just hold the camera, pointing it forward, letting it shoot on auto, knowing that it was going to produce something that was blurred. And if I followed somebody at the same sort of speed as they were going, they are going to be in focus relative to the background, because we're both moving through the image at the same sort of speed, if you understand what I'm saying. So it's the opposite of panning, I guess. But I keep them relatively still, but they will still bounce up and down as they stride. You know, the walk will take them up and down, and they might move side to side. And what's happened here, this figure with the backpack on has moved in the same direction as us, and we're both traveling down the street. The only thing I've done to this picture is change the white balance. It was slightly bluer than this, and I wanted to accentuate the reds here. And in changing it to a slightly warmer tone, I suddenly got this fabulous sort of Turner-esque palette of colour, which is why I really love this picture. And as I say, I've only literally printed it yesterday to see what it would look like. Another creative technique, I've got a camera that's been converted to infrared. So this is just out in Bath, and it's just silhouette of chimneys. What I have done here is I've rocked slightly side to side just to make sure the light flares off that chimney to echo the little flare spot there taken. So this is stopped down about f20 something or other on a really bright day, but infrared. Excuse me. Sticking with sort of architectural shapes, this is a picture of a rectangle and a curve. It's actually a multi-story car park, and the walkway from the car park to the shopping centre, which is behind me, over the main ring road inside town. Compositionally, the important thing here was just making sure those two didn't intersect to break up that curve. But it's just a shape image, something completely different. And again, one of those filters, early filters, this is mid-90s, taken in Lake District, autumn colours. It's effectively just posterized the picture, so you can see I've blocked up the colors here into colors. It was just a one-click button that did it for you, but again, I thought I'd have a play. And I liked the color here in the foreground, warm colors contrasting with the cool tones in the background. I've obviously put it on steroids. I've upped the saturation to extreme. Doesn't worry me. I like it because it conveys the feeling of autumn colors as opposed to the actuality of it. And this is what I was saying right at the very beginning about discovering the image and what it means to you. Intentional camera movement. I have a play with that from time to time. I'm sure most of you have had a go at some point. It sometimes works, it sometimes doesn't. I haven't made up my mind whether it works or not on this one, but it's just an illustration of the technique. I've had a play with it. When it works well, it works well, and when it doesn't, it doesn't. Another picture looking at shapes. This is just it's a poor scan of a slide, so apologies for the quality, but it's in camera composition, so it's a straight image, and I've composed it to make sure that that corner goes straight into that corner there. This one doesn't intersect, so it doesn't break the top there, and this one doesn't break the edge. And then narrow depth of field, so I'm focusing here and it's dropping off so that this becomes a mush in the background. So it's an exercise in depth of focus, really, and abstract shapes, nothing more or less. But it did get into a competition in a magazine in the mid-90s, you know, so it won me some points, nothing else, but points make prizes eventually. Similar sort of approach. So this is Tresco, and it's a cactus, what do you call them, a hand, but it's taken at 45 degrees so that it makes the most of the differential focus. So I've only focused on this one spike, but the focus drops off really quickly because of the angle. And what I particularly liked was the way that the green here just sort of merges all the way round into one, and it just disappears into nothing. And again, it's an illustration of sort of shapes and contrast and abstract. Couple of monochrome images. I still haven't decided whether I like this one or not, and I haven't worked out why, but it was an exercise in just trying to capture one of these lily flowers in monochrome. Some people don't like it because it's half white and half black. Other people did like it because it was half white and half black. I don't really care. At the end of the day, I take photos for me, and if a judge likes it or a viewer likes it, that's all well and good. That's a bonus. I much prefer this image. Judges don't, but that's their loss. And the reason I like this is because of the shape here. You know, it's almost balletic in its poise, you know, with one leg coming down here, and it's sort of gently arched over and tilted the head, but it's got one arm sort of gracefully on the edge of the frame. So that's a snake's head fritillary. And I crawled around in a field on a wet morning looking for individual flowers that had this pleasing sort of shape, and I've tried again since, and I've not bettered this yet, so I quite like that anyway. I mentioned briefly that I took that skyline on London 24. This was another shot that I took on one of those. It's a photo marathon. You start at 3 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and you shoot all the way through Friday evening, Friday night, and then into the morning, and then through until Saturday afternoon at 3 o'clock. So you've done the full 24 hours. They did it every year on the summer solstice. This is the first year they've missed it. They've been going for about 5-6 years. I've been on 3 occasions now. And this was the last time I went up, and taken in Oxford Street, and I was doing a bit of street photography, and it was a case of, I saw the poster boy in the window, and I thought something might happen, and I got lucky with these two ladies coming past, and the bonus was the woman waving her arm, with them both looking in that direction, and you can just speculate as to what the conversation is. I'll leave that to your imagination. I'll also leave this one to your imagination. Words are weapons. We've all seen that with Trump's tweets, insane as they are, but there were another 3 lines of text below this, but I decided to focus on these because it's a little bit ambiguous, and you can now interpret it and put your own meaning onto it. Wandering around town in Bristol at lunchtime, I was out looking for abstract patterns on whitewashed windows of offices being or shops being refurbished, and I spotted this, and I thought, oh, I'll have that. And then I saw there was this sort of gap, and as I peered through, I saw this guy was having his lunch. It was lunchtime, so I tapped the window, and he turned and gave me this sort of, what are you on about, what are you doing sort of look, and that's what made the picture. You know, obviously I went to take this, I saw the opportunity, changed my focus, and took that picture, and I quite like it. Here's another one just down the road, so the same, about 2 minutes later, and again I saw the hello and the smiley face, and that was what caused me to stop. And again, I noticed the guy inside, but what really makes this one was the fact that he turned and looked at me and gave me this little smile that sort of fits with this. If he'd given me this expression, it wouldn't have worked, but because he gave me that little bit of a smile, and you've got this big smiley face, I think it works. So you have to be prepared. You know, not everything wins, you know, but be prepared, and then you make your own luck. Back to London, you are allowed to take pictures on the tube, even though the staff will tell you otherwise. It's regarded as a public highway during its normal operating areas. So just like you can take pictures in the street, you can take pictures in the underground, as long as you don't use flash, you don't use a tripod, and you don't get in anyone's way. So I just tucked myself out of the way. And for me, I've taken out the yellows in this case. That's all I've done. Otherwise it's a straight image. But by taking out those yellows that you get with the lights, yellowy greens, you end up with this much cleaner image, which is more graphic and more, it's a stronger image for me. It tells me more about, you know, what it feels like, and it's cooler, starker, harder sort of image. So again, it's about finding the image that works for you. Another one in the tube, this was on my daily commute or weekly commute. So on this occasion, I did have my SLR with me, but I'm using a fisheye lens. I just leant across against the edge of the corridor, holding my hand and the camera as close to the wall as I could and as steady as I could. I knew the exposure was about 10-15 seconds. I knew anyone walking past me would be rendered as a blur silhouette. It was a lot brighter down there. I've exposed and focused here, and then just let this happen. You know, that's London down the tube. It's not always about movement or big things. This was at Porlock Weir in North Somerset. It was a grey day. They're grey stones covered in grey silt. Everything was grey. But what I noticed in the base of this harbour when it drains, it's tidal, was the fact that the water dribbles down these stones with this very fine sediment on it and leaves these fantastic runlets. So I took lots of pictures, and then it was just a case of pushing the clarity up to 100%, pushing the contrast up to 100%, and slightly increasing the saturation, and suddenly you get images that start to appeal to, well, to me. I don't know whether it appeals to you, and then just assemble those together. And what works for me is this chain here with one link on this picture, so it ties those two together. I think it was a weaker composition without that. One of my few landscape pictures that I'm going to show you, but on this occasion I did go here to take the picture of the sunset, but it wasn't a full high risk case of driving 2 hours to get there and hoping that it was going to work out, because what you can't see from this image is I've already bagged 3 shoots on the way here. So I stopped at Old Boopery Castle first, which you saw at the beginning where I put the vagabond in front of it. I then went to the Old Boys Club, which was a bit like Butlins for mine workers, which has been derelict since the 1920s and has slowly been falling apart. And that's where I took the picture of the graffiti which said alive. So I've got a whole stock of images from there. I then went to Ogmore Castle, which I've not shown you anything of, but I have used images from there. So this was the 4th location in this day. So the day was already a success before I got here. And then you presented with these clouds. It was nothing until the tide came up to here. When I first arrived, it looked horrible because it was just a mess. But the tide coming in just made this. With the clouds, so I took that. I did want to stay for the sunset, but you can see there's a solid blank of mush here. And 20 minutes later, that cloud had advanced towards me, completely killing the light and blocking off the sun, and there was no sunset. I left it as a poor show, and sort of 20 minutes, half hour after this, I turned around and came home without waiting for the sunset because it wasn't going to happen. So it could have been a wasted trip, but it wasn't. And I got this into the Welsh Salon, so you know, took a picture to Wales. Another walk locally to us. You've got to just take photos of clouds when they present themselves like that. Not much more you can say, really. And another picture of clouds. This is up in Yorkshire Dales while I was on holiday, and there'd been a humdinger of a storm had gone over, this was the remnants of the cloud coming over the hill and forming this sort of cigar shape. And I really like that. What I've done is I've darkened the foreground down, because you don't need to see the road and the tree and the cottage that's in there, because they're not relevant. This is about the cloud. So that's what you've got. Art galleries, a good hunting ground for people shots as well. So this is a gallery in Bristol. There was a video here, and it seemed to be on a loop for about 20 minutes. You could tell it was a loop because it started and you could see it was actually steaming, and then it sort of, I presume, just got colder. I wandered off around, I saw this and I wandered around the gallery looking for other people to photograph in the gallery, and then I came back and they were still there. So I took a picture of them. So that's my picture of coffee lovers. They watched it a second time round, I think. So it might still be there as far as I know. Who knows? This image, on the other hand, is an absolute straight out of camera shot. So, you know, you just need to think about things a little bit creatively. And this is great fun. I'd urge you to have a go at this. So I've put a table in front of the TV with a bottle and the glass on it. And I've taken the HDMI output from my camera, plugged it into the TV. So my live view is now being played onto the TV, which I'm watching through live view. And you get this loop going round. And what you get is all of this repeating patterns going off in all sorts of directions, a bit like a bad 1970s pop video or the intros to Doctor Who. These light patches here are actually the exposure and aperture details on my live view, but because they're out of focus, they're blown out. And what that then leaves you is these dark spaces in between. And when I saw that, I thought, I'm having that. Click, took it, because what I saw were two men wearing flat caps looking like prohibition guys, and here I am drinking me contraband. So this is my image nearly drunk, and when I took the picture and finished the shoot, that was drunk. You know, you can get creative straight pictures if you just think about them. So again, have a play with it. It's hours of fun doing that. You can produce some really wacky images. So that's the end of that section. If anyone's got any questions, happy to take them now.
Okay, Mike, thanks very much for that. It's absolutely superb. Very interesting to see the complete spectrum of images that you've worked with over the years. Absolutely great stuff. So thank you very much indeed. So anybody got questions?
No.
No? If you have, just unmute yourself and...
I've got a question.
Okay, John.
Mike, what conversion have you got on your infrared camera?
920 nanometers.
Oh,
so
I thought you had, yeah, because of the color retention in it.
Yeah, you just get a red negative basically, and all I did on that one was to desaturate it. I just literally just pulled the saturation down in Lightroom.
I've always had infrared. I used to use film originally, but since I could have a camera converted, I had a Nikon D70 converted years ago, and I've got a Fuji converted now. But I like infrared a lot because I'm basically a black and white worker.
Yeah, it's a bit of a Marmite technique, isn't it? But
pretty much so.
Yeah, I haven't used mine this year at all. I need to get out with it.
I've got a 720 conversion. I do bring the color back into some pictures because I think with some pictures it does work.
Great. Anyone else got questions?
I think the questions might come later.
How did you do that? Yes.
Yeah. Once it all sinks in, I think you know, then we need probably need Mike's phone number.
You can find me on social media anyway. So you've got my link there to my photography page. I don't post much on Instagram because it's too much of a pain trying to get pictures off my computer onto Instagram. You know, it's designed for people using phones. But and there are some hints and tips on my website. So by all means, have a look at those. And I mentioned about people that I follow. Let's have a look. Where is it? These are some of the images you've seen before already. I thought I had, no, they're not there. I thought I had the list. I'll find that list of people that are tutorials that I follow.
Okay, that'd be very,
so you can circulate that.
That would be very good to receive, because I know a lot of our members do like to troll and find stuff, and you know, hints and tips to good presentations is always good. Yeah, Steve.
Mike, it's quite easy to put photographs on Instagram from your computer rather than your phone. it's quite straightforward. If you go on YouTube, that's how I learned how to do it, but it is quite easy to do.
Yeah, it sort of works sometimes for me. I find that using the emulation mode tends to keep breaking, so I have to keep working it out again and finding a different workaround. But yeah, I'll have another look.
Okay. Anything else? I'm going to stop the recording now. So thanks for allowing that, Mike.